Hey guys, thanks for tuning in to another episode of Forgotten Weapons. My name is not Ian McCollum,
No,
and
no, it is not. Your name is Henry Chan. You are not Ian McCullough. I'm Ian McCullough.
that's true. But I found the channel, so I'm keeping it.
What? You can't find a channel. What are you talking about?
It's covered in Cosmoline in the corner over there.
Okay, that actually would make some sense, actually.
Anyways,
Okay, so we are here today to talk briefly about the Chinese language and how it relates to my new book, Pistols of the Warlords, because you and your dad helped me with one particular element of this. Actually, you helped me with a bunch of translations of interesting markings that we found on some of the pistols. But we also wanted to translate the title of the book into Chinese and put it on the back cover, which we have. If you look at the mock-ups of the book, we've got that on there. And it was actually your father who did the calligraphy for that. And you came up with the title translation. Now, that doesn't sound like that big of a deal, right? Like, I'm thinking translate from English to French. There's maybe a few choices to make, but this is much more of a thing going into Chinese, isn't it?
yes. So Chinese, oh gosh, the Chinese language it's an old language, and if the warlord era was any indication, Chinese is very regionalistic, i.e., there was a lot of fighting, and there were a lot of wars. Think South America and the differences in the Latin tongue, and then just amplify that. So within one translation for any type of pop culture, anything from the West, there could be multitudes of regional translations into how they would portray it to the regional audience. And actually, the funny thing is, we experienced that with your book. Between you had a few other translators, and we also pitched an idea, and I think there was a lot of dialogue in between that actually reflected that.
There was. So yeah, like I took the translation that you had and I ran it past some guys in mainland China, and they came back and said, "Oh no, that's real. Whoa, you don't want to do that. Like that's the wrong translation. You should do it this way." And sent me back something that was 5 letters, was visually similar to what you had written, but 5 letters instead of 4 and slightly different. So as it turns out, this is more than just like regional differences in how something is pronounced or in a few words here and there. This is like significant regional differences in how one actually chooses to express themselves.
Mm-hmm. So we're talking about multiple regions, and the main 3 regions I think you really tapped into were Hong Kong, Taiwan, and China, right?
Mm-hmm.
And the way... Okay, so one of the best ways I think that we could really delve into this is look at what has been translated for pop culture in the past.
Okay.
And I think one thing that we had talked about in the past is a movie that you and I like a lot, Saving Private Ryan.
All
in
right.
English, it's Saving Private Ryan.
Like not that hard.
Right. In the UK, it's Saving Private Ryan.
Right.
It's exactly the same. However, in Hong Kong, it would be 雷霆救兵. Forwards. And the reason the reason we used 4 words is because it conforms to the 4-word idiom that is a very popular theme within Chinese culture.
Okay.
So 雷霆救兵, and that realistically, if you translate that, it means to save a soldier from a thunder or lightning studded battle pit.
That is an evocative translation.
Whoa, I want to watch that. But
who doesn't want to watch a movie about thunder-studded battle pits?
Indeed. But that's the thing. Hong Kong translations typically have a dual meaning. It has an underlying meaning. It uses literary references. I'm not saying original titles, I'm saying translations to titles. Whereas if you look at what the mainland China did, it would be 请救大兵瑞音. And I have to be careful because my Mandarin isn't perfect. Because the word 瑞音, the first word 瑞 is in Cantonese, it's sui. So it doesn't translate in Cantonese because 瑞音 is the Chinese way of saying Ryan.
That makes sense. Yeah. So it's not actually trying to translate the word Ryan into something that means the same thing. It's literally just translating the two syllable sounds of Ryan into letters in Chinese that have that same pronunciation.
Correct. So in the mainland Chinese translation, 请救, that means to rescue. 大兵, that's a GI. Typically, a lot of times it's tied to the American GI. 大兵, the big soldier is literally what it means. American GI. So then Ryan, so rescuing the American GI Ryan. Saving Private Ryan.
That's a very literal translation as opposed to like Hong Kong's Wah!
To save the soldier from the thunder lightning studded battle pits. I mean, that's Hong Kong. So then you have the Taiwanese translation, which would be 抢救瑞音大兵. The word 抢救and the first two words doesn't necessarily just mean to rescue, but fighting to rescue. So there's a fighting element that's also put into the Taiwanese translation, but still it's fighting to rescue Ryan the GI.
Okay. So what we have here largely is like a desire in the mainland Chinese translations to avoid any sort of subjectivity or nuance or implication in the title, and just to give sort of a legalistic, exact word for word translation, where Hong Kong is going the exact opposite way and trying to invoke all the emotions and the feelings and the meaning of the movie and cramming that all right into the title.
Correct. There's a marketing aspect in the Hong Kong translation to it. There's an interpretation aspect to the Hong Kong translation to it. And in my opinion, there's a bit of literary and poetic aspect of almost like an art of translation rather than a task of translation.
And that brings us very conveniently to the title of the book, because the pushback I got from mainland China was, this translation that you're presenting us with has incorporated all sorts of subtle meanings, and you don't want that. You want a very literal translation, where I would tend to agree with what you had proposed for the title, which is much more of a Hong Kong style, embodying the character of the book in the title.
Correct. So, I mean, so in my it was a really interesting clash of ideas between the regions that you consulted, because that is exactly what we talked about. The mainland Chinese came up with a book, the book title that literally said the handguns of the warlords, or the Chinese warlords. I don't think they said Chinese, but the handguns of the warlords.
Yeah, it was just warlords. Yeah.
And then I think the Taiwanese came up with something similar.
I didn't have a specifically Taiwanese one.
Oh, excuse me on that. I didn't mean to speak out of bounds.
No, the other one that we were looking at was yours.
Correct.
Was what?
And what we proposed was Guan Fat Tun Hai. Now, initially, we did not propose Guan Fat Tun Hai. That's with my dad's. My dad and I had talks about that amongst ourselves a little bit more. Initially, I kind of went off on a limb to say, okay, so first of all, Guan Fat, that is the Chinese word for warlord.
Okay.
There's not really a real deviation from that. It's the word for a warlord is a word for a warlord. However, let's talk about four-letter idioms. Let's say the warlord period, 官法时代. Another word that constantly is used to describe the warlord period is 官法國國. In Chinese, if you say 官法國國, everybody knows the time frame you're talking about. You're talking about that pre-World War II era when there were warlords running rampant, taking regional powers, and honestly, these are not nice people.
No.
If you're thinking about warlord in the movie Lord of War, that's an apt description of sort of how some of them acted. Not all of them, obviously. I mean, they're not
A
all.
lot of them. Nicolas Cage was awfully charismatic in that movie, in a way that the real historical figures generally were not.
I wasn't talking about the arms dealer, though.
Okay.
I was talking about the warlords, the African warlords.
Oh, yes. Yeah.
Yeah. So a man who rose to power, whether it's through revolution, whether it's through local regional movements, or whether it's through old world political ties, these were warlords who came to power because they were strong men.
Yeah.
And they had some way of securing that regional power, and they fought constantly. And so the phrase Guanfat Gokor, the last two words, if you were to just translate it into English, you could translate it into to cut and to occupy. But the word cut, the word got in Guanfat Gokor is a little bit more direct. It's almost got a slashing motion conveyed in it. It's almost like when you harvest wheat, you use your sickle to slash the base of the wheat. And that motion is got. And then the word go is to occupy. And if you put that in your mind, Guanfat Gokor, that is actually a very apt description of what happened during that era. Strong men going, slashing, forcefully taking and occupying certain parts of the country.
Yeah.
Now, if we were to pull it back to nowadays, a lot of times what I was trying to explain to you, why I wanted to use a four-letter idiom, was a kind of a throwback towards that phrase, Guanfat Gokor, because that is such a classically known phrase. It's a four-letter idiom. It fits the Chinese literary rule of using four-letter idioms. But then I changed the last two words from the slash and take and occupy initially to ti hai, Guanfat ti hai.
Okay. And what are those last two words?
Those last two words literally it means to be armed to do something. But in the legal sense, it had a nefarious meaning because it's usually used to describe when, let's say, armed robbery. Ti hai would be the term to fit into the English word armed. And it's usually used to describe crime, bad things that you would do.
That fits the theme of the period.
And I think that was the one big thing that really stirred the pot.
Yeah, exactly.
And we got a lot of feedback on that. And I know they were really telling you, hey, you don't want to do that because it's got a secondary meaning. But on the other hand, I was pinging Ian. It's like, dude, the secondary meaning is awesome, man. Like, this is totally has a hidden meaning to it. And, but then,
So there are a couple people who actually noticed that the mock-up of the book and the translation on the back cover changed. And what was originally on there before we started the Kickstarter, when we had it up on the website, was that first translation.
Correct.
And we changed it. You thought about it a bit, talked to your dad, and you changed it just slightly. And what you changed it to is what we're actually going with on the finished product. So what was the final translation?
So the final translation is Guanfat Tun Hai. And you'll notice that one word has changed. Ti hai, the word ti, has changed to tun. Now, the word tun has a very specific meaning in a military sense. You could say tun beng, which means to muster troops. Tun leung, which means to save grains for military purposes or store grains for governmental use. And then tun hai is to stockpile arms. Again, with a semi-nefarious meaning to it. And in the four-letter idiom, referencing the warlords and having a throwback towards the Guanfat Gokor, the warlord era, the warlord slashing and occupying. And so that's the final phrase that we came up with. And it wasn't entirely me. It was through conversation with my dad, and it was nice. It was nice. I got to talk to him, and really, I don't have a chance to talk to him about a lot of literary things nowadays. And he and I grew up we're a library type of family. So it was nice talking to him and kind of reminiscing some of the old days when I was still young, and we talked about things like what certain words meant in a literary sense.
Nice. Oh, that's fantastic. And I think what you came up with is a wonderful translation for the title of the book. I think it fits perfectly on the back cover. I mean, it's a little different now that we're doing this video, but generally speaking, the vast majority of the people who are getting that book are English language fluent and probably don't speak any or minimal Chinese. So not very many people are going to really recognize it, although having anyone who sees this will now. But I really like having some of those little details in the book.
It's worthy of an explanation because there's some hidden meaning behind it as we had designed it to be. And I didn't tell you, but during this recording, as I read the different titles, when I read the titles in Mandarin and for the mainland Chinese title and the Taiwanese title of Saving Private Ryan, I read those in Mandarin, and I read the Hong Kong one in Cantonese, and I read my translation in Cantonese. So
sneaky.
Yes, so that's my way of sort of delineating, the origin of the translation. However, despite the regional dialects being different and very difficult to understand each other if you don't speak the other dialect, you could understand the text even though the dialect is different. Chinese it's an old language.
Okay, that's like talking to people from Mississippi.
Sure.
My apologies to everyone from Mississippi, but you get the idea. The written language is the same. It's just pronounced differently.
I cannot say that I've had a lot of literary experiences in Mississippi. However, Ian, I will go with your judgment, and I trust you on this this explanation that you've given.
All right. Well, I really appreciate it, Henry, both for the work on the title and the other translations you helped me do for the book. We will actually have a little snippet from you in the book explaining the thought process behind this. So
thank you.
So those of the readers who do understand Chinese will have some context for why did they put this wrong translation in.
Well, no, look, Ian, my dad told me to thank you too, and we both thank you for involving us in this. I mean, it was kind of cool. Every now and then, out of the blue, I would get pictures of strange, muddled up Chinese text, and Ian would go like, "What does this say?"
The best one was "Made in USA."
Yes,
on a pistol that was most assuredly not made in the USA.
But it is interesting. Some of the translation, almost you would go back on almost like a forensic type of dissection of perhaps it came from this region, perhaps it was saying this, perhaps this matches X Arsenal's name. Yeah. And I think the other part of that is when you're translating a picture into a text is unlike English. You can't just type it in. And in Chinese, when you enter text into an electronic software, either you use the Chinese keyboards or you have to know how to write the certain letter in whatever stroke sequence it is. And so that was really interesting, being able to basically try to figure out some obscurities and turn that into an actual thing. It was fun. It was a lot of fun.
I'm very glad. If any of you guys haven't seen the Kickstarter, or you probably haven't been watching much of the channel recently, but I will have a link to it down in the description text below. It is still ongoing for another almost 2 weeks. So definitely check it out. We've got a little bit of Henry's great work in it, as well as everything else. Thanks for watching, guys.
Take care.